of some kind or another. Dialogue about a united Ireland is becoming more frequent. It does, however, require long-term planning. To discuss this, I'm joined on the line by Fianna Fáil Senator Mark Daly. Mark, you're welcome to the programme.
Thanks for having me on.
Delighted to do so. We've had, you and I have had discussions about the Taoiseach stance on this, about a quite in-depth study you and colleagues have conducted on the economic benefits and costs of a united Ireland. But one thing that doesn't seem to be very much in the public domain is the preparation that would be required were a united Ireland to come to pass.
Absolutely, and I suppose the lesson of Brexit, as we see even today over in Westminster, is that any referendum on a united Ireland would require long-term planning and engagement. And a research report, which I launched this morning, into the issue of the referendum, looked at a case that was taken against the Secretary of State by a unionist who was also a victims' rights campaigner, and Raymond McCord wanted the Secretary of State to come up with a policy on how that referendum on the United Ireland would be called, how the Secretary of State would judge that the majority of people are in favour. And what we discovered in the documents supplied by the Secretary of State to that court case was that the Secretary of State has the power and is the only person who has the power to decide who gets to vote in that referendum, and as of yet has not decided who's going to be allowed to vote in that referendum.
I would have assumed, Mark, that anybody certainly resident or normally resident in Northern Ireland that has ordinary voting rights would be empowered and enabled to vote in any such referendum.
Well, I suppose if you look at the UK Referendum Act, which covered the Brexit referendum, currently in the UK, it's 18-year-olds and upwards are allowed to vote. British citizens, Commonwealth citizens and Irish citizens are allowed to vote. However, in the Scottish independence referendum, that franchise for that referendum was expanded to include 16-year-olds and 17-year-olds and upwards, and also EU citizens. So that was how that referendum was conducted. And you have a situation, of course, in the South where only Irish citizens are allowed to vote in a referendum. And until such time as there is clarity around that, an agreement around that, there is doubt as to who will be allowed to vote. And the other, I suppose, thing is that the Secretary of State cannot say that the majority of people in Northern Ireland are in favour of United Ireland or against United Ireland until, first of all, the Secretary of State decides and tells us all who's going to be allowed to vote. And we know that Northern Ireland has a tragic and sad history of denying people the right to vote, and this referendum cannot be another chapter in that long story. So the first step is the issue of who's going to be allowed to vote. But as we said at the outset, the most important issue is to have that long-term engagement with all sides so everybody knows what they're voting about. We don't want a campaign where people are putting slogans and lies on the side of buses as happened in the Brexit referendum in England. We want the facts. And
or afterwards, Mark, as has happened in England, people saying, well, we didn't know what we were voting for.
Absolutely. And this is one of the most important referendums this country will ever face, because it will define us for the next 100 years, for centuries to come. And we need to make sure that we take the time to do the preparation, and that the referendum is the event that is at the end of the journey, not at the beginning of the journey, and then try to figure things out, because we can see the consequences of doing a referendum in that format over in Britain and the disaster it has been for Britain. And like, I've been to the north, there's a lot of unionists talking about a United Ireland. They're wondering what that's going to be like. And we had the former moderator of the Church of Ireland, Lord Eames, talking about it and wanting to know what the Irish government's vision is. And Leo Varadkar on Friday said that the government aren't making any preparations. And I'm not saying that they should be preparing to have a referendum this year or next year, but at some stage, and 60% of unionists in the Lord Ashcroft poll a month ago said that they believe there would be a United Ireland in 10 years. Now, if I was put in charge of that project, it would take every hour of 10 years to put in place all those issues, address all the concerns, look at the economic impact, the health system, the education system. Like, we want the health system that's more like the NHS than what we have, and they would in many instances prefer to have the education system that we have, because far more of our students go to third level than they do in the north, and we have obviously a better economy. But we have to look at all the issues, and it takes time. but it also takes effort, and it takes a will of the government to lead this process. And at this moment in time, they're saying that they will not make any preparation.
And Mark, this would be an enormously complex, vast, and one would imagine, if ill-managed, unwieldy campaign, because philosophically, if you said to people, depending upon their heritage, history, context of their lives thus far, do you want a united Ireland or don't? It's a yes or no response. But then when you say, well, look, we're going to have to merge the infrastructure of the state, you may live with the NHS now, thereafter you'll live with the HSC. Your views on one or the other may colour your vote. How are we going to manage the education system? How will we align, state infrastructure policy? How will we regularise tax matters? That is a vast amount of information to try to convey to any electorate.
Yeah, it's a huge challenge to do all of that. And, the HSE and the NHS are one of the key issues, because, we, as I said, would prefer to have a model more along the lines of the NHS, and that is what the Sláinte Care report was about, launched 2 years ago. There's an implementation process around that. That's not going as well as it should be, but that would lead us to boards and to a universal healthcare system that we all want to see. So what we would look at is what is the best of both jurisdictions, and bring that forward in both of us and put that in place for the benefit of all the citizens of the state. But as you said, it is a huge task. This is an enormous task, but this is the main aim of the state. It has been the main aim of the state since the enactment of the Constitution in 1937. It's the main aim of all the main political parties. But now we have to look at, because of the issue of Brexit, bringing this idea to the fore, and it being discussed more and more, not only in the nationalist community in the north, but in the unionist community in the north. We need to address their fears and their concerns, look at the issue of identity and all of the other issues that we need to look at, and make sure that we address those concerns well in advance of a referendum, so that everybody understands what they're voting for.
Mark, this is how long is a piece of string question, but how long would you envisage that any such campaign would take leading up to a referendum? And that would be from pre-planning what we want, what we don't want from each jurisdiction, how they're going to be merged, to the development of the campaign, its execution, and then finally the vote.
Yeah, I mean, if you look at more current referendum campaigns, like the equal marriage referendum and the one in relation to choice, that process, depending on how you calculate it, from Citizens' Assembly or constitutional conventions along to government white papers, can take up to 2 to 3 years. But that they were, complex issues in of themselves, but, they were largely revolving around a singular issue. This is the entire state. This is everything from health, education, foreign policy, defence, the Garda Síochána. The whole structure of the state will be involved in this process. It is a huge challenge. It will take years, but, the lesson of Brexit is we need to take the time. We have to look at all the issues. We have to look at them carefully. Mm-hmm. You have to have people engaged on all sides, and unionists are willing to engage. I've sat down with them. They've discussed it with me, and they've said it on the record. And Lady Sylvia Herman, who's the unionist MP for North Down, a lovely lady who I've the pleasure to meet a few times, has said on the BBC that there will be a referendum on a united Ireland in her lifetime. Now, if she's saying that there's going to be a referendum, then we need to prepare, and we need to address all the concerns her constituents have, and make sure that we do that in a comprehensive fashion.
Fianna Fáil Senator Mark Daly.